Welcome back, everybody, to another great episode of The Resilient Mind. It is a snowy Monday morning in January, and I'm joined with my good friend Steve, and we are going to enjoy Snow Day. And we're going to talk about presumptions, perspectives, and what we get into when we start thinking what other people are thinking or judging our actions or developing our actions based on what the outcomes of others may think or feel about it.
Yeah, I think this is a wonderful, wonderful topic because we do this really in all areas of life. Whether it's, do I reach out to this person and say, invite them on this podcast, as we were just talking about? Do I speak up in this meeting? No, they're not going to value what I have to say, and therefore I won't ask. Or they're automatically going to say no, so I'm never going to ask. We do this very often in a lot of areas in life. So I really love this conversation. And I think what's going to come from it to help people take that step. And actually, in spirit of that, because it is Martin Luther King Day, here's a wonderful quote that I absolutely love from Dr. King, which is, you don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step.
Right. Love that quote.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to what we always talk about is like, feeling daunted by so much. Yeah. So taking it back and just focusing on the here, the now, where I'm at, how can I take that next step? Simple, manageable progress, right? And, let's talk about a simple, manageable progress is when you're thinking about doing something and you get really caught up in, well, I don't know how people are going to respond, or maybe those aren't always the best questions you should be asking yourself. I feel like maybe you should stop and say, is this something I really want to carry out? All right. If the answer is yes, right, we might want to think of consequences both ways of how people may react to it, just to have a general understanding of what feedback may come my way or what repercussions of my actions may revisit me. But I don't think that it should hold you back if you think that if you really want to do something and it's not, there's no negative consequences, maybe people just might not resonate or like it, or like, well, then who cares? Go for it anyway, right?
Yeah, I love to ask it in this way. Are we creating self-fulfilling prophecies, or are we preparing for potential outcomes? There's a difference, right? It may be a nuanced difference, but there is a difference. I may be feeding into something that's going to create the answer that we are perhaps dreading because I'm already playing into that being the only outcome that's going to happen. Or am I objectively saying there may be potential outcomes that happen here, and here's how I will handle each of them should they happen? Because I may, to your point, Andrew, say, I want to get a promotion in my career. I want to move it forward, but man, I can't even ask my supervisor about it, or I can't promote myself because no one wants to hear it. They're not going to be willing to talk about it with me. I've already created that self-fulfilling prophecy if I'm not going to get promoted because I'm not going to advocate for myself, nor am I going to set myself up by understanding what that path looks like by having a conversation with my supervisor. Versus, I'd really love to talk about career growth with my manager. I should bring that up. They may say, yeah, let's have this conversation. I'm like, no, it may not be the right time for that. How am I going to handle each of those? There's a difference in that mentality of I'm going to ask the question I want to ask, and I'll prepare how to handle each potential answer from my supervisor or my boss, versus they're never going to talk about it right now, so I'm not even going to ask. Well, you've already ensured the answer is no, and I'm not going to have that conversation because we've already taken ourselves out of that equation.
Right. And I think that's something that humans do to ourselves a lot of times when we're not ready. Like it's our unconscious intention to sabotage ourselves so that we don't take the risks, so that we're sparing our ego or, what seemingly is disappointment, right? But the thing is that you're also depriving yourself of the act of courage. You're depriving yourself of the possibility. You're depriving yourself of all these things. So there's a price you pay both ways, right? Like, yeah, you may spare yourself some disappointment, but you're also ensuring that you're not going to at least be hurt, because at the very sense right there is like you're filtering or suppressing something intrinsically that needs to come out.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to illustrate it a little bit further, actually, I'd love to bring up two things we may have already talked about on this podcast before, just because I love them as examples. So forgive the repeat should they be repeats. But I'd love to bring out the 96 Atlanta Olympic Games, specifically the women's gymnastics and the gold medal that we won. And then also Jessie Diggins winning the first ever gold medal in cross-country skiing for the U.S. in the most recent Olympics. The highlight there is really the same concept. Carrie Strug had to vault on an injured ankle to win gold for the U.S. In that moment, because of hurting her ankle on her first attempt, so a little backup, at that point you had the best of two vaults. I think that's still the same actually in gymnastics. And the highest score is what was counted. So it's down to her, it's down to the vault, it's down to this winning the gold or not. Her first attempt, she clearly hurt her ankle. In that moment, she can make that choice of, you know what, my ankle is hurt. I'm not going to vault as good. I'm not going to be able to run. I'm not going to be able to perform as well. She could take herself out of that game, lose that gold medal. But she also has that choice to embrace what it is that she does want, that she can try, that she can walk away with her head held high, knowing she focused on what it is that she wants to achieve and that she gave her absolute best effort, and she chose to go down that route. And she ended up winning that gold medal for the U.S. because she gritted through something, knowing what it is that she wanted, actively giving herself that chance to get the outcome that she wanted, versus just defeating herself ahead of time and saying, you know what, I'm hurt, I can't perform as well. Because if that was her mindset, that's what would have happened. She would have created that self-fulfilling prophecy. It's the same thing with Jessie Diggins when she won the gold. She was on the final lap of a relay in cross country. So her and Keegan Randall, were the team for the U.S. Going into that last lap, Jessie was in third place. She ended up getting into first place, but around a bend and a hill coming into the final part of this lap, she ended up falling back into third. She had that choice to say, you know what, I gave it my all. I gave it a good shot. I'm not going to make it. Instead, you could clearly see she wanted it more. And you could clearly see her pushing a little bit harder and really striving to do everything she possibly can and absolutely leave nothing left out on that ski slope. And she pushed past to win the gold. She retook second. She retook first. And she beat everybody across that line. It was very close. But you could see that mental choice of, I can't beat these people. It's over. There's no chance. Why should I even try? She would have created that self-fulfilling prophecy if that's what she thought. But instead, she allowed herself to see the possibilities of what was in front of her and say, you know what? I'm going to put down as much effort and work as hard as I possibly can. Leave it all out there so that I give myself that chance. And it may have ended up that she didn't beat the team that won, which I think was Finland. I believe that came in second, and Sweden, I believe, came in third. That could have been what happened. And at least she would have been happy knowing, right, that she left everything out. And of course, yes, we still want to win, but the fact of the matter, she gave herself that chance and that opportunity because she embraced the possible outcomes and knowing that she put down everything she possibly could to make that happen versus just resigning to, you know what, it's over, and creating that self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'll take a little bit step off my soapbox now and turn it back over to you, but I think they're perfect illustrations of what we're talking about. Are we creating self-fulfilling prophecies or open to potential outcomes?
Right. And what I heard were two stories of deep resilience there. And really digging deep into that. Humans are incredible creatures. Like our potential is pretty much unlimited, except by us. Like we are the biggest limiter of everything that we are capable of. And the more you believe you are incapable, the more that prophecy comes true, and the more capable you believe you are, the more powerful you become. It is just I've seen enough evidence that I'm a firm believer in that. I make minor things that old me used to think were impossible possible all the time. Because it's a story, right? It's a story you're telling yourself. In the dog training world, there's a funny thing. We talk about triggers and then we talk about cues, like there are these two different things, but they're actually the same thing. What they are antecedents. They are precursors to behavior. Why one is a cue and one is a trigger is the story we write about them. Triggers are usually associated with unwanted behavior and problematic things, bad emotions or unwanted emotions, unserving emotions for both the animal and the human, where cues are usually revolve around like, this is how it's supposed to work. We're jiving. This is all good. But at the end of the day, they're both antecedents, which are triggers for behavior. Behavior works in a sequential ABC order. Antecedent triggers a behavior. Behavior happens, and then a consequence happens. How much things are manipulated in between those steps is how behavior change happens. So when you feel that first thought of, I can't, stop, take a breath. I can't. Small incremental change.
Yeah, it's very, very true. And you brought a really good point in that last sentence, I can versus I can't. We've probably talked about this before, but we don't process negatives in our brain. Great example, the typical, hey, if I told you to jump off a bridge, would you? If you're of a certain age, sure you've heard that example from your parents. It's a great illustration because if I say, don't jump, you have to first think about jumping in order to think about not jumping. So you're inherently already more focused on what it is that we don't want to happen, which is jumping. But if I instead say, keep your feet on the ground, you don't have to overcome anything mentally. We've already processed that what I want is to stay on the ground. And it's the same thing with that thought of I can't versus I can. If we're focused on I can't do this or don't do this, we already inherently have to think about the thing we don't want in order to think about not doing it, right? So let's say I can't get promoted. I have to first think about what it is going to lead to not being promoted, right? Whether it's that conversation, or I can't possibly have that conversation. We're thinking about that negative, the stuff that doesn't serve us. In other words, focus on what you can do, what you do want, the serving side of it, the conversation you do want to have. I am going to get promoted, right? It is possible. It's a very valid point in there, Andrew.
Yeah, it's simple shifts in your thinking that open up huge amounts of possibility. And there are lots of little things in your life that are all tied to these things. But it just becomes in a daily practice of like, is this way of thinking serving me? Like, what is really going on here? Like, feel your emotions, but then think about what's coming up for you, right? And then dissect that. You know, there's a process. It's like the and then kind of way of kind of digging deep. Like if we're talking about like trying to get to the bottom of something, you got a feeling and you can't shake it, but you can't put your finger on it. Well, what's coming up for you? And then you say that, and then you know, you keep kind of just asking yourself if, what, then, or it, and then, or if, what, this, that, until you come up with what's there, or you can't dig anymore. But if you do that exercise and it's on paper, you know, what you can kind of see is what's coming up for you.
Yeah, and writing things down is great for us because it forces us to actually mentally process what's going on upstairs in our brains, and getting it out on paper will lead to greater clarity. And the benefit, and then the benefit of that is you also have it in front of you, and you can always refer back to it, and you can see it all the time should you choose. We're very visual people as human beings. So in the light of this conversation, in terms of, are we creating these self-fulfilling prophecies, or are we preparing for the outcomes, going through these explorations, having it be physically in eyesight can help us always keep those top of mind and help us shift those focus points. As Andrew was talking about, those small shifts, those small steps, the visual reminders and cues can help us go down this path. And when we start waning from that, when we start saying, oh, I can't do this, or it's not possible, and you know, they're never going to listen, or they're never going to say yes. When I catch myself going down that path, it's easier to get out of it and help us go through that mental process of combating that if we have that visual cue. The two examples that I gave earlier about Carrie Strug and Jesse Dickens, coming soon are actually photos of those two and those two moments. And they're going up on my wall, my office, for that exact purpose. They are going to supplement what's already there as visual cues and reminders to help me stay on point. They remind me to embrace what I can, what is possible, and to strive for it, and that we can overcome. So again, another great kind of inherent point in there is the visualization of it, the exploration of it, and keeping us on point by having that exercise, say, written out and serve as that visual reminder for us that it is possible.
Right. You know, we are really good at creating whatever we want, and the more control we are of it, the better. I think I've said this before, but I still find it so inherently like, that's not the right word I was looking for, but I find it really an interesting fact, which is that almost every person has a good amount of creativity. It's either conscious or unconscious creativity. And the more that you drive it into your vision, into your conscious being, into your thinking, the more power you have behind it. Whereas when you're not being intentional with your creativity, it can kind of F with you a little bit. And it can become those deep feared seated anxiety things that we go through every day, those stories that we start writing, you know. And it starts like when we're in school, right? Like you on Sunday night, you're like, oh, I don't want to go to school tomorrow. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. And then you wake up in the morning and you go, and it's not like that at all usually, right? Like it's school or whatever, but we inherently always kind of write this doom and gloom story when we've associated things that we're not thrilled about doing. And then once we get there, it's usually not nearly as bad as the story we wrote.
Yeah, there's a very fair point, and you're hitting the nail on the head with creating that self-fulfilling prophecy. If I go into thinking this class is going to be awful or terrible, or this is not even going to be worth it, I'm more likely to find things to pick apart and make it fit my narrative because I'm not even open to it. You're talking about an instance where we've created that mindset and mentality around something, but once we get into it, maybe are feeling a little bit better, we're more open to actually what's occurring and more open to those potential outcomes, versus when we get very angry or flustered or down or just that kind of feeling, we're more likely, if we're remaining in that state, to create that self-fulfilling prophecy because we purposely look for things to fit our narrative and we make that outcome happen, versus allowing ourselves to be a part of something that has potential different outcomes that we can handle versus the one that we are creating. So I think it's a very good point. And that's a great question actually for our audience from today, honestly, is at what points in our lives have we created those self-fulfilling prophecies? And this is going to take a little bit of self-reflection and objectivity to be honest with ourselves. When have I forced something to fit my own narrative? It's a really good exercise to go through because it can start really ingraining this concept of, you know what, it does happen. It's part of who we all are, but it doesn't have to be that way. That awareness and that acknowledgement is an integral part of creating these shifts that we're talking about. And being honest with ourselves is one of the very first steps.
Yeah, I mean, we all do it, but it serves no one lying to yourself. You know, there may be some cases where there are beneficial delusions you can give yourself, but they're rare. More than likely, it is in your best interest to look as objectively as possible at all things. A practice you can try is to say that there are no such things as positive or negative events, just events, and they're neutral. And here's a practice you can try is, we all have that story that we like to tell about one thing or another. What's the event in that story? And tell it in several different perspectives. Tell it as the best day ever, the worst day ever, from the third person's perspective, and rewrite that story a bunch of times and see how that event is not one way or the other. It's the story around the event that gives you the emotion and the context.
Yeah, I love it. I love it because I think it illustrates a wonderful, wonderful point of inanimate objects and concepts are inherently neutral. Being as we're in playoff season for football, I'm going to use that as an example. When we talk about playoff football, there's usually more pressure that comes with those games. But at the heart of it, it's just a football game that is literally no different than any other game. What makes it different is us, human beings. The game's inanimate. The game still runs 60 minutes. The game is still set up in the same way. It's us as human beings that create the pressure and expectations that make it different.
Right. And it's actually proof that things are neutral, right? Yeah. Because again, it's a game. And if we just say, the facts, one team won, one team lost, but the fans of the losing team are viewing that as a negative thing, and the fans who won are viewing it as a positive thing.
Right.
But that's because that's the story they wrote about the thing.
And if you want proof of this,
they're attached to the result.
Right. Great proof of this concept, honestly, is, I will say I'm very fortunate to have gone to a Super Bowl in my life, but I walked away going, man, that's a weird feeling, because it was neutral. You had Cardinal fans, you had Steeler fans, and it wasn't like going to a Steelers home game that was, 99% Steeler fans and amped up, and you got the crowd going. It was neutral. You didn't have any of the typical home game stuff and scoreboards and music that you would do for the Steelers, or even for the Cardinals for that matter. The atmosphere was weird because it was neutral, because it's a neutral game. And it's a wonderful, wonderful illustration of, we tend to put our feelings onto something and then naturally associate them with that thing, saying that this thing is good, bad, serving, not serving, so on and so forth. Wonderful point.
Right. And that's part of what we're trying to bring out for people, is that if you can unattach that story to that feeling,
Yeah.
right? You could rewrite the story. May not change how you feel, but it might. And if it does, then you have another tool in your toolbox to be more resilient to the hardships of life. Um, we're flying around in a rock in space, people.
Yeah. So to circle this back around to the concept of the day, you've brought out a very good story already around it that I'm gonna latch on to, about presumptions that we go into conversations with, and assumptions about how things are going to go. But the school example that you used specifically, I could go into school, or I could go into a work conversation saying, here's how my boss is going to react, or here's how my teacher is going to react. And often you walk away like, I did not see it going that way. Right? This was unexpected. We can't predict how other people are going to truly react in that way. Maybe there's a good chance it may lean a certain way, but that doesn't mean it's going to go that way. So the great question for ourselves is, even if I feel like, it's more likely that this conversation is going to go this way, I should accept, excuse me, I don't like that word, should. So I apologize. I'm going to delete that from the sentence. I can prepare that it may not go that way. So my boss may either say yes, they may say no. Either way, let me be open to how they naturally react to this, and I may prepare different things to say based on what they say to me, and that's okay. But if I force it to be a certain narrative or perspective, I'm actually going to inherently not only mentally go into that conversation to create it that way, but I'm also, especially when we're interacting with other people, going to give off body language and energy that they're going to pick up on, that also create it more likely to go that way, because you're naturally creating that issue that may not be there. So if we go into these situations with an open mind, it's easier to be receptive to what actually is possible, and then to shift and adjust as it goes in different directions.
And I actually have a real life example of this, this is an exchange between an employee of mine and myself. Is at I had a little bit of shift change in my staff. And so in the past, because we all work separated from each other, I'm trying to stay in connection with my staff by checking in with them every morning and just setting my intention for the day, whatever it is, just the day in excellence, to have good walks, to enjoy the weather, whatever it may be. So as things happen, I got off track, and then I started telling myself stories, and I was like, I'll get to it. And then I mixed another day, and then I was like, oh, now I feel awkward about, reaching out and doing it again, even though I said I was going to. And I was like, what is all this happening? And then I actually ran into my new employee, and we were walking dogs, and we ran into each other, and we were walking, and he was like, so, sorry, I've missed your intentions. And I was like, you haven't missed them. I haven't been sending them. And he was like, oh, I thought that was weird. I almost sent one out, but I didn't know how the rest of the employees would feel about me stepping into that arena in that fashion. And I was like, oh, well, it would have lit me up. So, just telling you, for in the future, do that stuff and be courageous. Right. And, he is able to get this feedback from me because we happen to run into each other throughout the day. And what I'm getting at is that he may have really blown an opportunity to connect with me if we wouldn't have run into each other throughout the day, because he could have sent that text and it could have lit me up, and it could have had me connecting with the whole team and empowering me and getting me out. And not only does that empower the rest of my team, but it also, makes me think about the new guy as, oh, initiative, like he's involved. What I'm doing has impacted him enough that he is mimicking that behavior or practicing that behavior. I've impacted him. There's all this information that could have been missed if just because he wrote that story in his head, that the other staff may look at him like a kiss ass or a brown noser is his his line of thinking when we talked about it. Yeah. But so all this cool stuff came out because we were open to talk about it, and that's who I am and who I intend to be. But it all could have not happened as well because he made that choice.
Yeah. It's a great illustration. I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's very applicable right now, especially over the past couple of years, and as we continue to play out the shift in the way that we work, especially in corporate America and remote work. There's this tendency to say, oh, I don't know what they're doing because I don't see it, so it's not necessarily, they're not really doing anything, they're slacking off potentially. We tend to create those stories in our head. So I think it's a very apt point for the working world of today. And are we creating these self-fulfilling prophecies by presuming and assuming, or are we open to potential different outcomes and having a conversation around it?
Right. And there's a narrative in the world right now that people don't want to work. And I don't think that's true. I think that people want to work differently. And I think that they need to be heard on that. Right. Because I mean, even in that episode of Hidden Brain about bullshit jobs, is people who have bullshit jobs, which means they basically just get paid for showing up, are miserable because the job's not challenging. It's not fulfilling. It has, it's providing, income so that they can live, but it's not, they spend more time worrying about what they're doing because they're not charged with much, right? So people do want to work. People do want to, expel energy on a daily basis. I think what we need to focus on is like, what do we all want to be doing to make this world a better place for everyone?
Yeah. So with that, we'll recap real quick kind of what we've gotten out of today. And I think the main points that we're really talking about is the mentality that we approach things in life. Are we making assumptions and presumptions? Are we going into it in a mindset and a mood that create these self-fulfilling prophecies because we purposely convey certain things to others that will trigger them, or we purposely look for things to fit our own narrative and we're not open to what actually is potentially there? And can we shift into preparing for different outcomes so we know how we'll proceed, but we're open to allowing them to unfold and to happen, and being able to shift and collectively get to a good place versus forcing something that becomes more closed-minded and closed and non-serving. I think that's really what we've covered kind of in a nutshell today. And we've given some examples of how to do that, the exploration that you've asked, like the and then, writing it down, asking ourselves those questions, having visual reminders, all different things that can help us shift that mindset and that mentality around this for us.
Yeah, I think it was a great conversation today. I think it gave there was a lot to think about, a lot to unpack. Life is an experience, and every day you get a little bit more information that you can add into the practice of what you want. And I think that's what we're here for, is to practice a little bit more of creating love and connection and authenticity and kinship amongst one another. Yeah, Steve?
Yeah. Agreed 100%. And to that point, we hope that you guys got something out of today. And if you have questions, thoughts, comments, we'd love to hear from you. Please just drop us a line. If there's something you want to know about and us to discuss, we are very open to that as well. But until the next time, you guys are in control. What you want is possible, and you can be that movement in your life.
See ya.